business as usual in some capacity continues, and companies still need to report out on their focus areas. They still need to engage with their investors who, I think are asking much more tough and specific questions about what is your process to understand and, more importantly, monitor the external landscape when it comes to these types of issues.
I think that
and that monitoring.
And that goes to your earlier point of authenticity, right? So do you bother to find this information? Do you invest in putting processes in place in your company and appointing people to look proactively for this kind of information? And do you have the tools available to help you do that? If you now tell an investor, oh, actually, we're not doing that because, either we don't see the relevance of it or the tools don't exist, I think both reasons are not acceptable anymore, nor true. So that, will prove to be an acceleration of how these issues, how these ESG issues are becoming elevated in business today.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in terms of what is the palpable relevance of ESG issues, sustainability issues, we're seeing a lot of news articles now saying that ESG funds are outperforming other funds right now in a time of crisis. So I think that's going to be really interesting to unpack, looking at why that is. And it gets to your point about, having process, having strong governance policies, really, being mindful of both the short and the long-term concepts that we've been talking about for a long time. But to your earlier point about leadership, I think what's really exciting is that we're seeing more and more different types of experts internally at companies getting involved in these processes and building their own competencies and expertise around ESG. Yeah. One of which is the risk management team. And I think when we look at traditional approaches to materiality around ESG issues and traditional approaches to understanding external risks, there's a lot of similarities. So we're starting to see more integration there. And I'm just curious, on that, what do you see as the future in terms of the role of the corporate sustainability of the corporate ESG professional post-crisis?
Yeah, I think for now, they're a central hub of information around everything that's going on in the world of ESG and sustainability. And they have a role to, educate people internally, and then to mandate different departments to take a specific topic or practice further. So I think they will be the integrators more than ever. I think in many cases it's still a separate team where things happen in isolation, where the team tries to gather information from different teams and put together the sustainability report. But I think this is going to be flipped on its head, and it's going to be much more about proactively sharing what they know about these risks and opportunities. Then their challenge will be to communicate that in a way that is fits with the right business narrative of the company. So when we talk about risk management, and we frame ESG as external risks, all of a sudden you get the attention of risk people that might not in the past not been interested in having a conversation around sustainability or CSR, thinking that's the soft stuff. All of when you reframe it as external risks, you have a different conversation. So we've seen on the corporate side a lot of collaboration between sustainability professionals and different business units, compliance teams, legal teams, risk management teams, public affairs teams. So really making it a cross-cutting exercise across the business. but not just horizontally, also vertically. So, as you
Mm-hmm.
said, sustainability professionals right now being called into these war rooms because of the interconnectedness of issues, but also called in to provide information to boards on these ESG topics. Um, and advising on what kind of governance structures would be appropriate. So that's happening within in corporates. I think within the investor community, we see similar things. You used to have separate ESG products, and now ESG data needs to be integrated into everything that already exists. So in a way, we might make ourselves disappear, you know, as a sustainability
Mm-hmm.
professional. Ultimately, I think we will win if we're not there, because we have created sustainable businesses and sustainable capital markets. Another very interesting development that we're kind of seeing very close by, because we're a product company. So we're using technology to scan external landscapes to understand, you know, which ESG issues are out there and which ones are relevant. We are seeing the interest from a lot of mainstream service providers to integrate our product into something that already exists and has existed for, you know, many years. Uh, Risk management, we talked about that. That's one. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, service providers wanting to have a more complete solution there, not just internal enterprise risk management, but also the external piece. We're also seeing it with law firms. We're seeing it with PR firms in terms of services like, you know, reputation management, M&A due diligence. So that I find a very interesting avenue for us as a business to explore, to see where can that data set, you know, and that platform looking at all these non-financial ESG issues, how can it be integrated into mainstream services? Because in that way, we get an, you know, an even bigger push, service providers collectively, bringing it into all different, you know, all sorts of avenues within companies and their clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that brings up a good point about stakeholder engagement. You know, we touched upon that before, but just what are you seeing now in terms of, you know, traditional stakeholder engagement models being disrupted? We can't convene at conferences and exchange expertise to really say, you know, what issues do you see coming up? We can't convene our different experts at a table to say, you know, what do you see as the priority issues for our company? So how do you see digitalization impacting stakeholder engagement over, you know, the long term, during the crisis, but also post-crisis?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I think, you know, most stakeholders, you'll be able to find them online. Technology gives us an opportunity to listen, you know, to listen what people are saying on social media, what consumers are thinking and saying on Twitter and Instagram and channels like that. So I think there's the stakeholder listening opportunity, and that's a thing that we identified already a few years back, and we started to listen actively there. But of course, there's also the direct stakeholder engagement that, you know, is oftentimes best done in person, as we know. But now we're seeing those limitations there. So we are also thinking now, how can we best enable that experience through a digitally enabled environment, beyond a survey into a more, you know, proactive workshop that can be done online. So I think that those two parts, you know, the listening part is there, which is also, I think, very powerful, because people might not say everything to you when you directly engage, but you can find them elsewhere and you can find these opinions. And then when you bring people in to directly engage with, how can we optimize, you know, digital tools? How can we, integrate a Datamaran platform within a Zoom context or a WebEx context, and how can we optimize that direct stakeholder engagement in the best way possible. So those are big things on our mind right now in terms of product development and innovation at Datamaran.
And that ties into the monitoring piece as well, just having an ability to monitor these stakeholder views, listen to these stakeholder views, not just at one point in time, but over time, to ensure that any changing expectations or perspectives are really captured in a timely fashion.
Yeah, and when you speak about, dynamic materiality, it's not the fact that the issues change, right? So you could argue 20 years ago, climate change was just as important as it is now. It's just that the entire the context around climate change has changed through new regulations and different stakeholders coming to the table on that, and of course also we're starting to see it very close to home, how the natural environment around us is changing. So the ability to understand what those issues are, but also the dynamics, the ongoing dynamics around those issues in terms of regulatory transition and competitive environment and consumer behavior, all those things are very evident right now, and technology has an important role to play there to capture that and to proactively inform companies on what is changing and why it might be changing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, in terms of the unpacking digitalization and the future of business, clearly this conversation shows there are a variety of elements, important elements to it. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you want to conclude with, or if you were to summarize, some of the key points that we mentioned into a final statement, how would you do that? Not an easy task, I think.
Maybe a couple of sentences on that then. So post COVID-19, the world will not be as we left it. We are all in a tough crisis right now and worried about our family and our businesses and this notion of going back to normal. Will we go back to normal? I think we should try to look at it also from the perspective of not wasting or not letting a good crisis go to waste, in the sense that we are enabled to do things differently going forward. And I feel like this is where the opportunity is for all of us to do things differently going forward, and how we treat the environment, our employees, our suppliers, our partners, and let's not mess up again.
All right, that's definitely a big task for all of us. But to your point, we have some time, some mandated time to work through that. So thanks so much for taking the time to be here today and to kick off our first Datamaran podcast series.
My pleasure.
Up next, we're gonna hear from some companies that we work with, some academics, some policymakers. So look forward to see how this discussion evolves over the next year.
Thank you so much, Susie. It was great speaking with you.
Thanks.